Inbreeding. It's not just for royals anymore, but boy oh boy was it, especially from the years 980 to 1880. Royal families have the genetic freaks in their family swamps to prove it. That's right. Hold on, because today on History Scalpel, we'll talk about the fascinating stories of inbreeding in royal bloodlines. They're all cautionary tales of why taking repeated dips in one's gene pool is bad. We bet you couldn't even imagine the real details. Before that, though, we wanted to briefly review what inbreeding is. Put down that popcorn. Inbreeding is what happens when people who are directly related by blood, such as cousins, siblings, and even parents and children, produce offspring. Doing so essentially turns people's family trees into a stump. The reason we breed, well, beyond it being fun, is to shuffle our DNA and pass our genetic lineage, which happens when people from different bloodlines combine their DNA and have kids. When the same bloodline has kids over and over and over, it's like the movie Multiplicity with Michael Keaton. Each copy gets worse and worse, and you start ending up with genetic yaks that cause diseases and other health issues. This turns a family's gene pool into a cesspool. We shouldn't have to say this at this point, but families don't have to play together to stay together. So don't breed with family members. We've got a bleeder. If you prick us, do we not bleed? Well, if you are a member of the royal families in either England, Spain, Russia, or Germany in the 18 or 1900s, chances are you sure did. Lots. Like the elevator spewing blood in the movie The Shining lots. This is thanks to a genetic error, or mistake, known as hemophilia, a genetic blood disorder that prevents blood from clotting in the body, thus forming scabs, and keeping all that sweet, sweet vampire juice inside, so we don't bleed to death. Now, we're making light, but it seriously sucks. Pardon the pun. Even a tiny cut can be potentially fatal for someone born with this affliction. People with hemophilia also bruise much more easily and have an increased chance of bleeding inside their joints or brain. In any of these cases, the result can be a slow and painful death. But how does this happen? As you can probably imagine, this genetic time bomb results from royals obsessively bumping uglies with their kinfolk to make their own bloodline stay in power. So much so that at one point, hemophilia was often called the royal disease. According to historians, it all started with England's royal family. What? Something horrific that affected innocent people in other countries being linked to them? Shocker, we know. The belief is that Queen Victoria, who ruled from 1837 to 1901, was patient zero for hemophilia. Get your barf bags ready. Every royal queen needs their king, right? Well, surprise, surprise, Victoria didn't have to look too far. Literally, she married her first cousin, Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, just 3 years into her run as queen. They, in turn, had 9 children together. Just gonna take a time out so we can be clear here, because it can be confusing. By first cousin, we literally mean cousins. Queen Vicky and Prince Albie's parents were siblings. If you need a second to do the Technicolor yawn at that notion, let her rip. Now, if you're sitting quite comfortably, we'll continue. Of the royal couple's 9 children, 2 of their daughters, Alice and Beatrice, were afflicted. In turn, they went on to have kids and passed hemophilia off to them. In fact, through various royal unions, hemophilia spread to the Spanish, German, and Russian royal families. Alice's daughter, Alexandra, married Tsar Nicholas of Russia, who passed on the affliction to her son, Alexei. If you know your history, or even just your Boney M songs, you'll know that in her desperate need to save her son, Alexandra turned to the infamous con man and faith healer Gregory Rasputin, who swore he could save her son. Instead, he conned her, did other horrible stuff, led to the fall of the Russian royal family, and got murdered. See why inbreeding is bad? Don't have a shovel? Use my jaw! Now that you know what a first cousin is, what do you think it's called when a person is literally their own cousin? Well, you call them Charles II of Spain, of course. Thanks, inbreeding! However, that's not all. Charles was also cursed with a Habsburg jaw, a genetic deformation where the lower jaw grows very large. It can sometimes resemble a shovel or lantern. Think Jay Leno, for example. Except much, much worse. Because of this abnormality, Charles II's jaw was so large that he could barely chew his food. All thanks to his royal gene pool being the size of a thimble. Along with Habsburg's jaw, Charles II's tongue was so large that he had trouble speaking and drooled like a mastiff. Besides his looks, let's just say that Charles was a handful of fries short of a Happy Meal. However, it's important to note how much Charles II's ancestors seem to have taken to interfamily boinking. The Habsburgs of Spain were noted to be basically the most pro-inbreeding of the European royal family. While his reign lasted for 45 years until 1700, Charles was said to have been ill for most of that time. As for Charles II being his own cousin, well, his grandmother was also his aunt. Meanwhile, his father was his grandmother's aunt's brother. And it goes on. Needless to say, his family tree grew into the shape of a pretzel. Incidentally, Charles II was the last member of his family to hold power. It all ended with him. An interesting side note in regards to Habsburg's jaw is that while we can't find a genetic link between them, the infamous Vlad the Impaler also had a form of Habsburg's jaw. Inbreeding is a hell of a thing. Speaking of Habsburgs, we must quickly mention one of the family's most infamous members, Joanna the Mad. She was the Queen of Aragon until 1555. While she showed signs of mental instability in her youth, she was said to be driven completely mad by her husband King Philip's continuous cheating. She even attacked one of his mistresses. However, after Philip's eventual death, things really took a turn towards what the f***. Not only did she keep the body in the house for longer than usual, Joanna the Mad also traveled with her husband's body for the entire 668-kilometer journey to his burial spot. Aw, sweet, right? Yeah, the thing is, along the way, she would frequently open the casket, embrace him, and kiss him. Her physical affections toward her dead husband were widely thought to have gone too far. It's a crazy little thing called love, right? Pharaoh, no, they didn't. We've all heard of King Tut, right? We've seen photos of his gold sarcophagus and heard the Steve Martin song about him. But the boy king who ruled Egypt was a genetic mess like you wouldn't believe. That's right, Europe didn't have the market cornered on genetic misfires through royal inbreeding. While King Tut only lived until the age of 19 before dying of a combination of a broken leg and malaria, he was in a bad way since birth. For starters, as a direct result of inbreeding, the boy pharaoh had a clubbed foot. Meanwhile, several of his toes were broken and dying. King Tut also had a cleft palate, which is a condition where two plates in the skull that form the hard palate aren't completely joined. As a result of this, King Tut had a hole going from the roof of his mouth into the nose. Cleft palates can also interfere with tooth development. This, in turn, would have affected his speech and, of course, eating. But wait, this bag of genetic misery still goes deeper. King Tut also had a curved spine, so he was always hunched over. Making matters worse was the fact that these degenerative conditions also caused his foot to swell up, which made it difficult to walk. In fact, Tutankhamun's sarcophagus contained more than 130 walking sticks. Again, all of these genetic medical conditions wrapped up in this one boy were the direct result of his royal family having kids with their kinfolk. Rather than a strong ruler to see their dynasty into the future, his parents produced a child who was cursed since conception. Speaking of dear old mom and dad, it's believed that King Tut's parents were brother and sister, which, again, yuck. That is basically a surefire way to produce a child with genetic problems. Knowing all this sets a stark contrast to the view many of us have of Egyptian leaders riding around in chariots and striking commanding figures. Instead, for about a decade, one of the most powerful people in the ancient world was a very frail boy. In some cases, we wonder about the true motivation behind some of these pairings. Was it all strategically done to consolidate power within a monarchy? Or was it sometimes a matter of one royal family member looking at the other and deciding to conduct a genetic experiment? Mix 2 equal parts direct blood relatives, add gross friction, repeat, and see what happens in a few generations. Conclusion. So that about wraps it up for us. If you're a royal family member and you're watching this, hello, we're willing to accept donations in the form of royal titles. But on a mostly serious note, history has taught us that some people will go to insane lengths to maintain power, including looking at a close royal family member and deciding to play a game of genetic Russian roulette. In many cases, it led to the end of the dynasty it was meant to secure. If the royals have taught us anything, it's not to follow their examples. Any of them. Thanks for watching today's video.